Okay, so the cinematic trailer for Marathon just dropped, and I have to say it's a gorgeous trailer, but let's try and actually make sense of what we are watching here. But yeah, let's jump into it. Okay, so from the get-go, the first image that we see is this massive planet on the background, and especially a focus on this moon from the planet. And it seems to me that there is a high-tech civilization living in this moon, especially from this shot right here. Because in this shot, we actually see that there's a bunch of different lights, especially in the shadowed area of the planet, because it's nighttime, which indicates that there's a lot of people, turning on their light sources. And so hence why we see so many light spots everywhere around the planet. This is obviously very reminiscent to what happens in the real world. This right here is a satellite image of the Iberian Peninsula, especially of my beautiful country, Portugal. And we can see that there's a lot of lights turned on. And I think that's exactly what they're trying to achieve here. After these two images, we have a short B-roll of a bunch of top-down view of the planet's surface overall. In contrast with that moon, it seems like this place is desolated when it comes to human activity. For example, in this image, the only activity that we can actually see is what, over here? And maybe over here, and that's basically it. In this image, it's kind of the same. We only have activity right here. This one is definitely a lot more prominent. I mean, all of this is definitely man-made, and there's some buildings right here on top, but it's incredibly scarce, I feel like. But this image is definitely the focus. And what we see in this image is actually really interesting because we see a bunch of these buildings right here. And we have another crater like the shot before. It seems like this is a mine. Something that is being explored by a civilization. A civilization that came to this planet in order to colonize it and get this resource, whatever that resource is. I don't think we have information on that. A very cool thing about some of these shots is that I think there's a clear intention on why they're showcasing all of these buildings on a top-down sort of view. And I think at least one of those intentions is to clearly showcase how all of these buildings are distributed. They look like a microchip. At least that's what it seems like to me. Especially when you look at later on, some of the interior designs, it definitely feels like they took a lot of inspirations on how computers and computer parts look like in order to design not only their exteriors, but also their interiors. And I think the overall objective of this is to emphasize this idea that all that you are seeing is a simulation. Or it's staged. But I'll talk about that later on. So we see this car coming in with two people inside and they're listening to this very specific song. And they see something going on here in this scene. We're seeing a bunch of missiles from everywhere coming in and not only destroying this moon, but also crashing into where they are. I do want to mention that this scene in particular, when looking at this moon, it heavily reminds me of these Japanese wind bells that are a symbol of good luck and good fortune. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but now they get out of the car and they see basically the destruction of the moon as they knew it. So essentially they are, from what I am understanding here, they're basically seeing the destruction of their own world, which is kind of what you do not want to see on a Friday night or something. And they also get attacked by these missiles or whatever. It's not clear if they die or not of this process, but I think it's safe to assume that they did because of what happens after. But, let's keep it that way. We jump cut to this dude. I'm assuming it's still in the same colony, right? Probably in another area of the world, doing some farming, I guess. But something happens with his hair tank, as you can see here. It goes down to 0. That has a lot of nitrogen in order for him to breathe. These people, this humanity, this civilization cannot breathe in this planet. It goes down to 0, and then he just falls and dies. And that's basically it. I'm assuming he's dying here. There's not much to it. This next scene to me is probably the most enigmatic one, and I honestly cannot make any sense out of it. Because this seems to me like a spirit that is in a sort of hospital. Because when I look at this, I look at some sort of blood bag spirit thing. I cannot make any sense out of this. I honestly can't. It is so bizarre, it is so weird, and I love it. But we jump cut to another scene, probably in another section of the world, that we see a dude basically dying to some sort of psychic abilities. That's basically it. I do want to mention that a bunch of dates have been showcased throughout this trailer so far. And the curious thing about this is that we see 3 different events going around in 3 very different dates. The first one right here was in 2794. The second event is in 2812. And the third one was in 2827. So all of these people died in very separate ages. And the events that you're going to see now are in 2893, which is almost 100 years after the events of this first scene. And what we see in this next scene is what it seems like a bunch of cybernetic caterpillars that are reconstructing this human into something else. I would call it a cyborg, even though we do know, you can see that it says right here, Sekiguchi Genetics. And if you actually go and research about Sekiguchi Genetics and you go .jpg, you find this website that was absolutely made by Bungie. It has a bunch of different informations regarding what is the company about, what do they do, yada yada yada. Now, to keep it extremely simple, just for the sake of this video, Sekiguchi Genetics is basically a company that makes biomatas, I don't know how to say them, but biomatas is basically another name for clones, which basically confirm, I feel like, that these characters that we are playing are semi-organic to a certain extent. My issue is, how organic are they? And if they die, they probably lose a piece of their organic material. Maybe a little bit of the leg, maybe a little bit of the brain, maybe a little bit of the arm, you know what I mean? So each version, you're losing more and more that sense of humanity, right? Because you're constantly getting reconstructed more and more by these cybernetic caterpillars. So you're losing your humanity the more versions you have.
I met a traveler from an antique land.
So at this stage, we see the character Void here. And he has this whole speech throughout the trailer in 2 different parts of the trailer, okay? I want to point out that this speech, specifically that he says, is a poem that was written by Percy Bysshe Shelley. I do not know how to say his name, but he was one of the most prolific English writers of the Romantic era. And he made this poem called Ozymandias. And I'm going to read it out. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things. The hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. No thing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. This is a very interesting poem, and I think what it's trying to tell us here is that no matter how big your kingdom is, it will absolutely fall to the passage of time. Think about the Roman Empire, think about the Egyptian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Mongolian Empire. All of those empires ended up falling one way or another. And this is kind of the case of Ozymandias, King of Kings, who even describes in his pedestal, look at all of my works, ye mighty, and despair. No things beside remain, round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. And what's fun is that he says in the end, the lone and level sands stretch far away. The sands are far away. All that you see around you is my kingdom. But as you know, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert, which means that the kingdom of Ozymandias is no more, and all that remains is sand. But the interesting thing about this poem is that it makes a big emphasis on the sculpture, that at the end of the day, the thing that stand tall was the art form of these people, not Ozymandias. I think the case that Percy is trying to make here, at least, is that if there is one thing that can perjure the passage of time to a certain extent, is by far the art form. The only thing that stands is essentially the work of the sculptor, his passion and his emotion when he did this piece of stone. And I think this is very similar to the events that we're following here from this character called the Void. We're seeing a traveler coming into this ancient land. He locates this structure, and after doing some digging, he actually finds this little piece that has a song in it. A song that essentially describes the same sort of emotion and passion that embodies this ancient civilization, I would argue. And when he actually listens to it,
And the heart that
it moves him. He feels something. If you're actually interested about that song was done by Alexandro Marcello, and it's called Adagio, even though the version that we listened to in this trailer is the version that was done by Bach. From what I've read, at least, it seems like Bach was so moved by this song that he actually transcribed it to a solo piano song, and it actually became extremely famous after that.
Welcome once again. Once again, once again.
Can we please?
You shall feel.
I mean, it feels just like what it is, right?
This AI tells her or asks her, how does the new shell feel like? So by new shell, she also means the new biomata. My guess is that this character is aware of what she is, right? That she is a shell or a biomata or a clone, which is interesting.
Your shell repayment is coming up and will be charged against your line of credit.
Yeah, I know. Do you mind if we skip the formalities this time? Got a big contract waiting down there, so.
Understood. Let's
We're constantly going to hear from this character a bunch of voices, which is really interesting.
do a grounding exercise. Are you familiar with this item?
That's my lucky charm.
You see, like, these are basically her thoughts. This heavily reminds me of Hellblade, actually, like Senua Saga's Hellblade. Throughout the game, you're basically hearing a bunch of different voices that are her thoughts. And I feel like this character or this game is trying to kind of achieve the same sort of effect here. Now, they present to her this specific
Can
photo,
you identify her?
and they ask her if she identifies her.
That's my mom. That's your.
Okay, so they present to her this photo of her mother, supposedly, and she's like super quick in identifying her, okay?
Now, consider
And the voices constantly go on, and she seems troubled by those voices here.
this. Do you recognize this?
But when they showcase to her this specific photo, she has no recollection of the photo
I
whatsoever.
don't know.
It's you.
So she doesn't recognize that it's her. I find this one specific scene right here really interesting, okay? She's looking at her photo, and then she flips it, and we see nothing. We see a blank slate in here, which is really, really interesting, and I think this is incredibly intentional. I think this could be a multitude of things. It could just be that she does no longer recognize her past self, and that visual cue is just a confirmation of that feeling. But I don't know, man. I feel like there is something to be said about the story of Raiden in Metal Gear Solid 2 that Joseph Cross has referenced quite heavily. Because if you haven't played Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden has a very interesting story that feels kind of similar to the vibe of Marathon, generally speaking. Raiden is a character that in Metal Gear Solid 2 is basically being used by this group that is called the Patriots. And the Patriots are essentially a group that works somewhat like a shadow government. They are the real organization that controls the United States of America and the Metal Gear Solid universe. And the Patriots have a very specific objective with Raiden here. They want to use him as an experiment to see how much they can actually control the beliefs, the identity, and the actions of an individual. To do this, they use Raiden as a test subject, and they mimic the events of Shadow Moses from Metal Gear Solid 1. And they give him this mission called Big Shell with the objective to corroborate this theory that they have that they can manipulate information and use it to control people's actions to the fullest. This initially worked really well with Raiden, but during the ending events of the game, and after defeating Solid Snake, Raiden learns about the truth of the Patriots, and essentially chooses to find his own path. Metal Gear Solid 2 is very much a game about free will. Do we have free will or not? And it's clearly not the only game that talks about that. I think there are a lot of references to Blade Runner 2049 in this trailer that I will speak a little bit later. First off, I want to talk about the character designs of this character specifically because I dig these character designs quite a lot. I think there's a lot of great work being done here. And to me, this character feels like she's the embodiment of the Y2K girl. The Y2K aesthetic is a well-known aesthetic in graphic design that was mostly predominant in the 90s and the 2000s, even though I think this aesthetic is very much gaining attention once again, especially with a lot of pop stars grabbing this style and incorporating in their brand. I can think of at least two, which is Lady Gaga and Lisa from Blackpink, are definitely grabbing this sort of aesthetic. Like, I'm saying that this is the Y2K girl, but obviously I think this aesthetic is actually present not only in the overall design of this character, but actually the entirety of the game. The style is obviously very futuristic, but it also uses a lot of like these shiny materials and a lot of like specular highlights everywhere. It uses a lot of these sorts of chromatic gradients, right? And it gives off this very eerie yet nostalgic feeling to us, I feel like. If you've seen movies like The Matrix or even The Fifth Element, I think those movies actually incorporate this style very well. Like, if you go back and actually play Dreamcast games, I think the Dreamcast, even when it comes to like typography choices and everything, I think the Dreamcast was probably the best thing that embodied the Y2K aesthetic for sure. I did find something really interesting. I found this image on Pinterest like randomly, okay? This person has the control tag on her body just like she has. So I'm wondering if Joseph actually got inspired by this image specifically for the design of this character. I did some digging and I did find this Tumblr page called the Institute for Y2K Aesthetics, and they actually talk about this specific image. This seems to be part of a bigger brand called the Control Lanza in 2000, which was a digitally themed air gel product. I do want to mention something that's probably obvious for a lot of you guys, but when you look at a lot of the aesthetics from the Void main character, it definitely seems like a lot of these patterns are definitely based on the QR code, which is really interesting. I mean, such a simple concept being put into this character, but it works really well in my view. Now, I do want to mention one thing. Obviously, there's a lot of things when it comes to graphic design for this game that have been a huge influence, most likely to Joseph and the part of the team. But one thing is for sure, at least from what I've seen, I feel like one of the biggest influences that I've seen is actually Joseph Muller-Brockman and Armin Hoffman and the whole style of the Swiss design and graphic design, which was huge back in the 50s, especially in, Switzerland, okay? That's where it came from. They have graphic design stuff like this on their Twitter page that is very similar to this overall aesthetic of the Swiss design. And this Swiss design actually kind of evolved in the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, especially in like commercials for Nike and Adidas and all that sort of stuff. But I do feel like this whole aesthetic of Marathon probably takes a good chunk of inspirations from people like Baugasm and Alain Vonk that embrace the sort of futuristic and Y2K vibe with a mix of Swiss design in the middle that uses a lot of these like sort of big bold topographies with like all of these chromatic gradients on top, That's just the vibe that I'm getting quite a lot. Baugasm and Alain have been like pretty big graphic designers that had a lot of impact in the graphic design scene in the last couple of years. Obviously, these are not the two main influences. I just thought that from everything that I've seen being talked about, I feel like these influences have not really been exposed, so I kind of just wanted to put this out there. That's just it. Especially Elaine, man, when it comes to like overall colorations and the saturation and everything. Obviously, I point out Mirror's Edge here, but I think they even mentioned that Mirror's Edge when it comes to art direction and this use of these really bold colors everywhere is also a big influence on them. And you can definitely tell, especially on some scenes like this, where you have all of these very bold colors like this orange and this yellow and this deep blue, right? They take so many inspirations, but they end up doing their own thing, even on the designs of, for example, these t-shirts and everything. Really cool. I'd buy all of these t-shirts, bro. Like, these are gorgeous. I'm not gonna lie. I do want to mention, I'm actually using one of their shirts because I really like them. But I feel like brands like God is a Designer, which is a brand that kind of mixed this sort of spiritual but yet futuristic vibe into this design of typography, I feel like it's in Marathon, in my view. Going back to the song here, there is this part of the trailer where this character, Blackbird, asks the Void this.
Hey, what's that you always tune into? Worth anything?
I don't know, but I like it. It speaks to me.
Let me listen.
Yeah, go ahead.
So she grabs the music, right? She listens to it. She doesn't really feel anything when she listens to it, which is very different from how the Void reacts when he listens to the song. It's kind of like he's surprised and shocked about how he felt. He felt something. He felt an emotion out of listening to that song, but it doesn't feel like she feels anything about it. Okay, so there's a lot of these sections where they showcase, you know, like here, some of the abilities of the characters. I've kind of skipped quite a few by now, actually. Mostly because this trailer also has this intention of showcasing some of the gameplay mechanics and abilities of the characters. That is pretty much one of the main objectives of this trailer, actually. So they have been attacked by these three, right? And it's kind of funny to realize that the character that actually kills the Void is part of the team of the glitch, which is this character right here. Okay, so the glitch here actually salvages the dude and also starts listening to this song. And when she listens to it, she instantly starts humming to it. So she knows the song already, right? She already knew the song. I honestly think that this character right here is most likely the glitch. It kind of looks like her, to be dead honest. And I think that's why she instantly recognizes the song, because it's her. And to be honest, it wouldn't be far-fetched to think at the very least that this character right here that is out of focus for a very specific reason, come on, could be the Void, even though he seems a little bit shorter than her. But it wouldn't be far-fetched to think that this character might be the Void, even though he doesn't recognize the song. It speaks to him. Okay, so he starts chasing her, and this is one of those moments that you kind of realize that this whole interior kind of looks like a computer, right? Like I've mentioned before, it kind of looks like computer parts or something along those lines. If you check, for example, images like this, it looks like some of these components right here that are basically, I think these are like insulators or something, or conductors, right? Which kind of emphasizes this idea that whatever this is, it's definitely a simulation and it's not real or it's staged. This is probably one of my favorite parts of this trailer. She gets shot. And once she gets shot, she rises up once more, right here. Everything just stops here, you know what I mean? For her, everything just stops for a moment. Like, she realizes that this is it. This shot right here is so goddamn beautiful, bro. Like, this shot is insanely good. This feels like one of those shots that you see from, like, security cameras when something goes terribly wrong, you know what I mean? If you've seen A Daily Dose of Internet, you know, those YouTube channels, you've probably seen scenes like that. This scene is beautiful because where you're looking at instantly is all the way up here, which is already a very weird element in terms of composition to look. And then you have this element right here and this element right here that are like blocking elements because they don't want you to look at this actually, right? These just kind of serve to blockade what they want you to look at, which is all of this, okay? They need to think about the flow of all of this. You are already looking at this part of the image because it's where the head of the character is and it's going to be blown up. But when you go to the next scene, you're already looking at that specific part of the image, right? Which is a great transition from one scene to the next. Bro, I don't know, man. Maybe this is just like a little detail and nobody cares. But I find these little things so interesting on a technical level that make some of these scenes so goddamn good, man. It's insane. I do want to point out something here, which is we get this shot right here. This shot right here. This is an interesting shot because this is not the first shot we see from this character. We actually see this shot 2 more times, right? Which kind of indicate that it might end up insinuating that she dies multiple times, like the same manner, but I don't think that's the case because she's completely bloodied here with her eyes closed. Here she's not even bloodied in the face. I think this is just a way to elevate that idea of a repetition, right? Of rebirth. Okay, so he takes the earplug thingy or whatever and starts listening to the song once again.
And on the pedestal, these words
And he starts humming to it also.
appear.
And he continues the poem of Ozymandias. He looks at the photo but doesn't really think too much of it. So he has no recollection of who that character is.
Nothing beside remain. Nothing beside remain.
And he gets shot. And it's kind of funny that he dies next to the glitch. We also get like a bunch of B-roll again of all of these images of nature engulfing once again this ancient civilization that is no longer here. Even sand is basically taking over, right? And it gets to a point actually that this image is beautiful also. This image is beautiful. I think this image is an even bigger emphasis to that idea that nature is once again engulfing everything. It's engulfing so much that is now incredibly hard to even identify what are these buildings or structures or whatever. It becomes harder and harder through the passage of time to understand, like, who were these people that came before us? This image right here, honestly, I don't know, man. I feel like there's a lot of Blade Runner 2049 references because this image heavily reminds me of the interlinked scene. I don't know what this is called. I don't know, man. Maybe I'm looking way too much into this, but I don't know. I think there's a similarity there at the very least. And we go back to the photo actually here and now with this new version of the Void. He looks at the photo. And we're talking about the same photo that is presented to the glitch here. And he has no recollection whatsoever of who this character is, of who this person is. Here's the interesting bit about this, is that
Is that me?
he asks, is that me? But the AI doesn't say anything. The AI made an effort to emphasize to the glitch that this is you. Like she told the glitch, hey, this is you. But here she doesn't say anything. I don't know, man. There's something here that is very odd. They're toying with us. They're definitely toying with us. Bungie is definitely toying with us here. Keeping things very ambiguous, at least that's what it feels to me. These two last images are also really interesting. There's definitely like an analogy, a parallel being done here with these two images of like an expanding roster of characters, right? With an expanding universe. Whatever this AI is doing, I don't know if it's an AI or it's another civilization that is destroying other civilizations, it is constantly expanding. That's what it feels like to me. It is constantly going to other planets, you know, killing other civilizations most likely to get more of these characters to join in Marathon. I'm not sure, man. Regardless, I think the biggest question so far that this trailer is putting on us is, what the hell is up with this photo, okay? And I feel like there is definitely a bridge here at the very least regarding Blade Runner 2049. Because in Blade Runner 2049, if you haven't seen the movie, spoilers, but there's this whole thing about fake memories. The main character and many of the other replicants, which are basically clones, they have been implemented fake memories of their past in order to make them feel more human. I think also for some reason it makes them more volatile and more easier to control from what I understand. I feel like potentially this might be what's happening with these two characters. They might have implemented the memories of these characters, right? Or this specific character. They might not even be related to them whatsoever, but they simply have the memories of this character in order to make them feel more human. I don't know. It could also be that, you know, they are that character that have been manipulated and constantly reworked and reprogrammed to be what they are today. I feel like the whole deal of fake memories is definitely going to be present in this game, just like it is present in Blade Runner 2049. The question is more like, how are they going to implement that? Okay, folks, this is going to be a long-ass video to edit. It's going to be a bummer. But, you know, this is one of those trailers that is just so deep and so interesting that it's probably going to be one mess of a video of mine. I'm sorry about that, but those were just some early thoughts of just me looking at the video and some quick thoughts that I had about it. Hopefully it's not too much of a mess. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you actually think about the trailer, if there's something that you find interesting. And yeah, have a good one. See ya.